Welcome back to the Midnight Historian. Tonight, we aren't talking about the grand victories of kings or the romance of knights. We are talking about the inventions born at 3 a.m. in the dark when a city was burning, coughing, or starving. The systems that govern your life today, from the clock on your wall to the forms at the DMV, were not created by calm geniuses in quiet rooms. They were frantic, desperate emergency fixes invented by terrified people trying to keep their world from collapsing. So settle in, dim the lights, and make sure you are subscribed to the Midnight Historian. Let's take a journey into the history of panic. The wall against death. Quarantine. Let's begin at the water's edge. In the 14th century, the arrival of a ship was usually a celebration of trade, but when the Black Death began its march across the world, a ship on the horizon became a source of terror. Officials in port cities noticed a pattern. Ships arrived, and a week later, the city was digging mass graves. They had no microscopes, no concept of viruses, and no medicine, but they had the power to stop time. They invented quarantine. It wasn't a medical treatment, it was a pause button. They ordered ships to drop anchor offshore and simply wait. For 40 days, a number chosen more for religious symbolism than scientific data, crews sat in isolation. It was a brutal test. If the sailors died, the ship became their tomb. If they survived, they were allowed to enter. For those 40 days, you were treated like a ghost, neither alive nor dead, just waiting. It was cruel, lonely, and terrifying, but it worked. This medieval pause button slowed the apocalypse just enough for civilization to survive, eventually evolving into the modern public health systems that protect us today. The ink of order, bureaucracy. We often complain about bureaucracy, the endless forms, the lists, the red tape. But in the Middle Ages, paperwork was a survival strategy. When wars scattered populations or plagues wiped out entire villages, society faced a terrifying question. Who is left? Who owns the land now that the owner is gone? Who pays for the army? Without written records, reality itself began to dissolve. So rulers turned to ink. They sent clerks into the chaos to write things down. Census lists, tax rolls, and property deeds were not created for efficiency. They were created to anchor society in place. The medieval clerk, hunched over parchment while the world fell apart outside, was an emergency worker. He was documenting reality so it wouldn't disappear. Every government form you hate today is a descendant of that desperate need to create order out of anarchy. The bell that rules us, standardized time. For most of human history, time was fluid. Noon was simply when the sun looks high. But you cannot coordinate a crisis with vague guesses. If a city needed to lock its gates against an army, or if guards needed to change shifts during a fire, roughly midday wasn't good enough. Panic requires precision. So medieval cities did something revolutionary. They militarized time. They built towers and installed bells that rang at rigid specific intervals. These bells didn't just tell time. They gave commands. Wake up. Start work. Pray. Go home. It felt unnatural to live by a machine rather than the sun, but it allowed thousands of people to move as one giant organism. We are still marching to the beat of that medieval drum, living our lives by the minute because our ancestors needed to synchronize their survival. Scrubbing away the plague, sanitation, medieval streets were originally designed to be multi-purpose spaces for walking, for trading, and unfortunately for dumping waste. But when the plagues arrived, people noticed that the filthiest neighborhoods were the first to die. They didn't understand germs, but they understood the smell of death. Sanitation began as a panic response. Authorities issued aggressive orders to clean the streets, not to make them look nice, but to push the sickness away. They dug gutters and fined anyone who dumped trash. It was a war against rot. It wasn't polite and it wasn't perfect, but it pushed the filth away from the living. Modern plumbing and street cleaning are just advanced versions of this medieval realization. Civilization cannot survive if it is buried in its own waste. Laws written in fire codes. Medieval cities were built of wood, straw, and tar. They were essentially giant bonfires waiting for a spark. And when they burned completely. After watching their cities turn to ash over and over again, authorities finally realized that hope was not a strategy. They introduced fire codes. They banned thatched roofs and forced people to build with stone and tile. They mandated that houses be spaced apart to stop flames from jumping across the street. These rules were hated. They were expensive and difficult to follow, but they were trauma responses. Every brick building and fire exit you see today exists because someone, centuries ago, stood in the ashes of their home and decided to change the way we build. The warehouse for the sick, hospitals. The modern hospital is a place of healing. The medieval hospital was a place of exile. When epidemics struck, there was no cure. The only option was to separate the sick from the healthy to stop the spread. Early hospitals were containment zones, often built outside the city walls. They were places to put the contagious so that the rest of the city could keep functioning. It was a grim calculation, sacrificing the comfort of the few to save the many. But this idea of a dedicated space for the sick was the seed of modern medicine. We eventually learned to cure people, but the system started simply as a way to put walls between the city and the infection. The uniform of authority. In the middle of a riot, a fire, or a plague, confusion is deadly. If everyone is screaming, who do you listen to? Medieval rulers realized that authority needed to be visible instantly. They invented uniforms. They dressed guards in specific colors and officials in distinct badges. It was a visual language. In a split second of panic, a citizen could look at a crowd and know exactly who held the power. Uniforms turned ordinary men into symbols of order. We still rely on this today. When we see a firefighter's gear or a doctor's coat, we instinctively trust them, a reflex programmed into us by centuries of seeking safety in the chaos. Controlling the hunger, rationing. Nothing destroys a society faster than hunger. When harvests failed, the rich hoarded food and the poor starved. Riots followed immediately. Medieval governments learned that a hungry crowd has no laws. To stop the violence, they invented rationing. They seized control of the bakeries. They fixed the price of bread by law and punished anyone who tried to cheat. It wasn't about fairness, it was about survival. Rationing was the iron grip that kept the city from eating itself alive. It taught governments that in a true emergency, the free market must end and total control must begin. Conclusion: we look around at our modern world, at the clocks, the forms, the hospitals and the clean streets, and we see a boring, orderly life. But if you look through the eyes of a historian, you see the scars of the past. You see the desperate measures our ancestors took to hold back the dark. These aren't just rules, they are the survival mechanisms of the human race. Thank you for spending tonight with the Midnight Historian. If this story helped you see the world a little differently, please like the video and subscribe. Sleep well, and remember, the order you see around you was built on the chaos of the past.